Hey y'all, it's Teresa. Welcome back to my channel, Sweet.t.reads. So I know I'm a bit behind on this video. This is my January wrap up, but I didn't start my channel until halfway through January. So that means a lot of these videos are going to be coming a little bit later than I would have liked, but that's just the way life goes sometimes. So in the month of January, I read 10 books, and all of these books were audiobooks. It was easier that month just to listen to audiobooks, even though I did have a couple copies of physical books that I listened to on audio instead of reading them physically, which I should have done. So the very first book that I read in January, actually it was kind of a rollover. I started in December, finished it in January, but since I finished it in January, I count it as a January read, and that is True Strength by Kevin Sorbo. This is True Strength, My Journey from Hercules to Mere Mortal, and how dying, oh my voice is a weird thing, how dying nearly saved my life. Or how nearly dying saved my life. Yeah, that's how it's supposed to be. Okay, this book, for those of you, well, first off, for those of you who don't know who Kevin Sorbo is, he is an amazing actor. He played Hercules for many years on the TV show Hercules, which was like a favorite show of mine growing up. I've got to meet this guy in person. He is a very, very kind individual and just like a really cool person. He's been in a lot of movies, a lot of TV shows. He was in Andromeda. Recently, one of his big ones was God's Not Dead. That's a video or a movie he was in. So anyways, for those of you who do not know, back when he was in Hercules, he became very, very violently ill to the point of almost dying. And this book is about his journey with dealing with that, going from being Hercules, like the strongest man on earth, to laying in a hospital bed, unable to move, with like tubes and things all throughout his body. He had a very severe blood clotting issue, and that sent, basically he had a clot that sent a lot of blood clots throughout his whole body, and had a couple of strokes, and so he had to be on like severe blood thinners and stuff like that. So he became very, very weak, and you know, he was someone who kind of like found himself, his identity was wrapped up in who he was in TV show, which was Hercules. So for him to be like, you know, dying was very difficult. And this is basically his journey through that, how he overcame the struggle and kind of what he felt like during the time. And this really spoke to me a lot because I have a lot of chronic illnesses, and while I did not experience the same thing he experienced, a lot of the emotions and the thought processing that he had during his time of being very, very ill is something that I personally have dealt with myself. And this book spoke to me on a level that a lot of books I don't think can, because it did relate so much to what I've experienced and what I am still experiencing. And I feel like it was such a good book. I listened to it on audiobook because actually he narrates it. This book is technically written by him and his wife, so it's like his story, but then his wife has some excerpts in here where she tells kind of her side of the story of things that happened. And there are a few times where a couple other people that knew him, so you can see, oh, is that gonna, there we go, so you can see like it was this person. So there's been a few times where people like that knew him either growing up, or his parents, or like his producer and stuff like that, they do have a few little chapters in this book that talk about what they saw him going through and how they perceived the struggle that he was dealing with. But man, this book, so good. This is a 5-star book for me, and honestly I think this is going to be one of my favorite books of the year. And it really is just because I connected so well to this book. I really feel like, even though we had very different experiences as far as what our health problems were, I feel like in a way he's telling my story too, and everyone else who has the very severe chronic illness or very severe illness, and kind of the thought processing that you have, and you know, how you basically need to work through it. And yeah, I don't know, I just really like this book. I recommend this to pretty much anybody, especially if you are someone who is ill or know someone who is ill. I really think this book would help you a lot. After that, I read The Devouring Gray, and this is by Christine Lynn Herman. I'm sure a lot of you already know what this book is about, as it's been very hyped on BookTube for a while now. But if you don't know, I will give you a quick little synopsis of it. Basically, this book is about a town that has a monster in the gray, and it eats people. And though basically there's these founding families of this town that have these supernatural powers, they have to basically keep the Gray at bay, and there's this new girl that comes to town and realizes that like she's a founding family member but has no idea about any of this stuff, no idea what's going on. She starts experiencing really weird things happening, and she's trying to navigate through basically dealing with the founding families, and it's all like teenagers, so it's a young adult book, and it's the basically the next generation, or the teenagers who are growing up to take the place of their parents who have always protected this town. And she finds out that she's one of them. So it's kind of that story of dealing with, you know, life as a teenager. She has lost, so it does deal with grief. This book has disability rep, as one of the characters is disabled. This book also has a lot of queer representation, and I gave this book a 4-star. I thought the concept of this book was quite interesting. I don't know if I've read a book quite similar to this before. There were quite a few twists in here that I really did enjoy and really did not see coming. So that's always fun when you can, like, you know, be surprised by a book. I definitely will be continuing this series, as I believe it's a series. I will be continuing it as I did really enjoy it. One thing that did stick out to me a little bit was I felt like on one hand the author was like really good about having like queer rep in this, but then on the other hand there was no diversity. So like everyone in this book was white, and she kept talking about how everyone was white. And so I know it's like takes place in like I think Vermont or something, which I'm sure biographically there are probably more white people in Vermont than any other race or color of person. I could be wrong on that, but you know, I think normally you would think that kind of New England area normally has a lot of pasty people like me. After that we have The Bells by, I believe it's pronounced Danielle Clayton. This was a 4-star read for me, and I really liked this book. So this is basically a book where people are born very ugly. They have like gray skin, gross hair, red eyes. They're just not beautiful people. And then you have the Bells, who are these beautiful women who grow from flowers, and they have magic, and their magic is to be able to turn people beautiful. So they're able to reshape your body, change your skin tone, change your hair color, your eyes, all that kind of thing. And they have this magic to be able to do this. And so this book follows a specific Belle, and they're trying to go to court, and they all are competing to be the Belle to the royal family. And so it follows this one girl's journey, and as she is dealing with her own emotions and own feelings towards the situation that is happening to her, it really dives into kind of showing the uglier side of the beauty industry, I guess you could say, and how not everything is so perfect, and the Bells are maybe not being used the way they should be. And I really felt this book was a really good representation of how people place so much value on physical appearance versus internal beauty. And I really thought it was a good representation of kind of what we're dealing with in our culture today, of seeing Instagram models and actresses and like Photoshop people and beauty gurus and all these people who are just like gorgeous people. And then you get just your average people who can't spend hundreds of $1,000s on beauty treatments and makeup and don't have personal trainers and all this. And even like the beauty influencers, like they all use filters and stuff anyway, so it's like they don't actually look like that. And I think in society today, there's such this pressure of being fake and looking fake that no one actually puts emphasis on who you are as a person. Like you could be the most beautiful person outwardly, but inside you could be rotten, and it's just like it takes away your beauty, and vice versa, you know? So I think this book really touched on that, and I really did enjoy that part of this book a lot. After I read The Bells, I read the sequel, which was The Everlasting Rose, and this basically is just a continuation of The Bells and of the main girl. I can't remember her name, I'm sorry, it's been a while since I've read the book, but it's basically a continuation of her story, and I believe it's only a duology. I do not believe there is a third book in the works. The way it ended, it didn't seem like there'd be a third book in the works. It seems like it was kind of wrapped up in a duology. This book I gave 3 stars. I just felt like the execution wasn't quite as good as the first book. It was kind of continuing the storyline, so I can't really tell you much about it without spoiling. I don't think the execution was quite as well done. It wasn't so much on the topic of dealing with, you know, beauty like the first book was. It was more of like an adventure story, which was good. It's just personally I didn't think it was as good as first one, so I gave it a 3-star. Next book on my list that I read in January was the 7.5 deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle. This book was disappointing to me. This was a book I really thought could be a 5-star for me. Unfortunately, I only rated it a 3-star. The whole premise of this idea of this book is that this person wakes up as a party guest, has no memory of the past, no idea what's going on, and he has to basically solve this woman's murder. And every day he wakes up in a new, different guest, and each day he has to try and solve the murder, and he only has so many guests to go through before the whole thing starts all over again and he'll forget everything and he has to try again. And so it's really interesting. It's like trying to figure out, okay, why was this lady killed and who did it? So it's kind of like a clue type of thing in that sense. And then you get the perspective of each different character as he goes from person to person to person. He kind of takes on a little bit of their aspects and a little bit of their personality, and you see what their point of view is throughout the whole day, because he basically relives the same day over and over and over again. So like Groundhog's Day and Clue put together. It sounds like it would be a great, great book. I don't know why, but for some reason, it just did not intrigue me like I thought it would. While it was interesting, I don't even know. Like, I don't even know how to, like, put my thoughts into words and say, like, why this book wasn't as good as I thought it would be. It just wasn't. I just wasn't as connected with the characters that I think I should have been. The idea of it, again, like the different guests and stuff, it reminds me of like an Agatha Christie book. Is there an Agatha Christie book that something like this happened in? I might be wrong on that, but I swear this story has been told before. I mean, not like this, obviously, but in the sense of like different people, you're living different lives or whatever. I don't know. But I was really excited because I love Agatha Christie, but if you know of a book that she wrote that was like that, you tell me, or otherwise I don't know. But I did, again, like the premise of it. The execution just wasn't great. I can't tell you why. I don't know. It just wasn't my favorite. It kind of felt like it dragged on a bit. It was kind of boring, to be honest. I don't know. Those are my thoughts. It was a 3-star read. It sounds good, but nothing to write home about. The next book that I read during the month of January was Turn of the Screw by Henry James. I have heard so many people talk about this book and Ruth Ware's adaptation, Turn of the Key. And I know there's like a Netflix show that's out, there's a movie that's coming out, and they're all like based off this book or adaptations of this book. And so I was like, I just need to read the book because I want to watch all the adaptations, read the adaptation, watch the movies, but I want to know where it's coming from, where they got their inspiration from. So I decided to get Turn of the Screw, sorry, by Henry James, and guys, it's not that good. I rated it like a 2.5. Though to be fair to the book, I did listen to it on audiobook, and I have been told that it's much better to read it than to listen to it, because it's actually a much better read than listen. So to be fair, this is a tentative rating, and when I get able to get a physical copy of the book, I will read it, and then I will put like my definitive answer, like, okay, is it just because the narration was poor that I didn't like it, or is it because I just didn't like the book? I have difficulty with understanding classics, and this book was written in like the 1800s, late 1800s, and it kind of Victorian era England, and the wording is very Victorian, and I just don't understand a lot of that. And so to me, I was just kind of like confused and didn't really understand what was happening. I mean, I got the base of it. So basically, if you guys don't know what Turn of the Screw is, it's basically a ghost story, a Victorian ghost story. And it's about a woman who goes to be a governess to these two children up in like the middle of nowhere in England on this huge estate, and the only other like adult that she has to interact with is the housekeeper. So it's just her, the two children, and the housekeeper. And as she's there taking care of the children, strange things start happening. She like sees visions of people, and she talks to the housekeeper about it, and it was like, well, who are these people? I thought we were the only ones here. And the housekeeper's like, oh, well, that sounds just like this person, but they're dead. So she starts to see the ghosts, and she starts to like have weird experiences, and basically it's her story of dealing with it and trying to take care of these children, and she believes that the ghosts are trying to corrupt the children and like steal their souls or something like that. So she has to protect them. And the idea of it is great, but really I didn't even know what it was about until I watched the videos after I read it of people explaining it to me, and I was like, oh, I see that now. So I think once I reread it again, now that I basically know what it's about, it'll make more sense, hopefully. It's just, Old English is difficult for me to understand. The other thing with this book was, oh my gosh, the author is so flowery. I really felt like this book should have been half of what it was. I think if he would have taken out a good chunk of the middle and just taken that out, and the book would have been so much better, because he just goes on and on and on about the same things and very descriptive of everything, and she's like going back and forth between, you know, is this really happening? These kids, like, another thing that was weird was, like, I guess it kind of talks about Victorian era, is the kids were these beautiful angel children, so they couldn't be the ones doing it because, you know, they must be corrupt by something because they're beautiful children. Beautiful children can do no wrong. Which I think is kind of his way of poking at society and saying, hey, just because someone's beautiful doesn't mean they're a good person, because I know in a lot of Victorian literature, the more beautiful the person, the better they are. Like, the hero is always beautiful and the villain is always like ugly and gross and nasty. And so I think this was part of that, of him saying like, hey, just because these children are like these beautiful angels does not mean that they're not messing with your head, and it's not them doing it themselves. Because she is like, oh, it's the ghost corrupting the kids to do bad things. But in reality, it's like, well, is it? Or are these kids just bad kids? And she doesn't want to admit that to herself. And so I guess the way this book is written is you don't really know. It's very open-ended, very open-ended. At the end, I really, when I got to the end of the book, I was like, wait, that's it? I had to like re-listen to the last chapter, and I was like, oh, okay. Like, it felt like it just like ended like all of a sudden. I'm like, that was disappointing. So yeah, that's, if you like open-ending books, that this one definitely has it. But man, I just felt like, you know, a summary of this book would have been so much better than the book itself. Maybe it's just I'm not a fan of the type of writing, but I don't know, I just felt like it went on and on and on about the same exact things, and I'm like, okay, dude, we get it. We get it. She thinks there's ghosts in the house. Okay, move on already. Yeah, I think, you know, I did give it a 2.5 because I did like the premise. I did like the idea. At the end, like I was trying to say earlier, and I guess I got sidetracked myself, you don't really know if the governess is actually seeing ghosts and she's like, they're messing with her head, or if she's kind of spiraling into this like madness, basically. Like, she's going insane within her own mind because she's isolated and like these things are happening and she's just like viewing things, and you never quite figure it out. I think the author leaves it very open. So it's pretty interesting. I did like the premise, and that's why I gave it a 2.5 instead of lower. But again, I will read the physical book and make sure that this is a true rating and not just because it was a terrible narration. I totally skipped a book. In between 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle, and Turn the Screw, I read There's Someone Inside Your House by Stephanie Perkins. I actually read this on audiobook because, to be 100% honest, I forgot that I had it in physical copy. I went into like my book room and I was looking at my books and I was like, wait, what the heck? And I pulled it out and I'm like, oh my gosh, I totally have a physical copy of this book. I could have just read it, but no, I listened to it on audiobook. Though I think listening to it on audiobook was quite interesting. This book, guys, have you read this book? Because this book, I love movie Scream. It's one of my all-time favorite horror movies from like that era. This is basically like a book adaptation, or not adaptation, but it's very reminiscent of like teenage slasher flick. It's like a teenage slasher book. Basically, this book is in rural Nebraska, and there's this girl who got sent to live with her grandmother. She used to live in Hawaii, and something really bad happened there, but they don't talk about what it was. And so she got sent to live with her grandmother in Nebraska while her parents are going through divorce and just things are happening. And she goes to a brand new school, makes new friends, and nobody knows about her past, and she wants to keep it that way. Well, on top of that, you have murders happening, and freaking creepy stuff happens, and basically it's gory. Like, I was not expecting that from this book. It was quite gory. I was like, whoa, okay. I mean, it didn't really bother me per se. I just wasn't expecting it. So when it started talking about it, I was like, oh my gosh, what the heck is happening? And yeah, so it's basically about like these murders happening, and this girl and her friends are trying to figure out what's going on. And these people are noticing things. The creepiest part, I just spit. The creepiest part about this book is people are noticing things like moving around. Like, okay, say you put like your cup on the counter instead of putting it in the sink, right? You go upstairs, do something, you come back downstairs, the cup's in the sink. You think, wait, didn't I put it on the counter? Well, I must have put it in the sink. You know, little stuff like that, that like very easily you could have been like, oh, I could have sworn I put it here, but it's in the sink and no one else is home, so I must have put it in the sink. Stuff like that starts happening to these people, and it just is freaking creepy because you're like, this person is in their house, he's killing people, but he's like in their house beforehand, messing with them before they die, and it's really scary. I read this at night and I was like, really shouldn't do that. Really should learn my lesson and not read scary books before I go to bed, because I didn't want to go downstairs in the middle of the night and find stuff moved around. This did remind me a little bit of the movie When a Stranger Calls, which I saw when I was way too little to see. Scared me very badly. So like one of my biggest fears is like this, like someone in your house like messing with you. Just like, yeah, it freaks me out. I gotta say, this was between a 5 and a 3 star. And I know that sounds so weird, but basically, okay, I wanted to rate it a 5 because it freaked me the heck out. I thought it was interesting. I never would have guessed who the bad guy was. The storyline was very quick, fast-paced. It kept going. It felt interesting. But the ending, I don't know. Like, okay, so at the end of the book, stuff happens, and I can't even talk about it without spoiling it. But there's a thing that happens at the end of the book that like made me happy, but made me like not like the book at the same time, because I felt like it should have gone a different direction, I guess, even though I was happy that it went in the direction it did. I don't know. It's weird. If you've read the book, maybe you understand what I'm talking about, but I felt like that should have been, even though it was quite high stakes, I felt like the ending wasn't quite high stakes enough. If that makes any sense. I don't know. I was really torn about what to rate this book, because it's basically like a teen slasher, so definitely go into this knowing that there's going to be a lot of gore and really freaking weird things happening, and if you're easily scared, don't read this book. But yeah, I ended up giving it a 3 at the end. I think just the execution at the ending could have been done a lot better, and that's why I dropped it to a 3 instead of a 5 star. Moving on from there, after Turn of the Screw, I read The Cruel Prince, which I know a lot of people have hyped on BookTube. I only gave this book a 3 star. To me, I felt like the enemies to lovers trope just happened way too fast. It was kind of like, oh, we hate each other, and then all of a sudden, oh, we're lovers. And I was like, what? Like, there was no, like, I don't know. I just felt like it happened way too quickly. And I do feel like some of this was a bit predictable. Basically, The Cruel Prince, for those of you who do not know, is about a girl who is taken from her family or this fairy basically comes, murders her parents, and whisks her away to fairyland and raises her as his own, because I guess it's like a fairy thing to do. So she's a human girl in the land of fairy, and fairies in this world are very brutal, very cruel, and she is in competition with the prince, which is The Cruel Prince is the name of the book. And so like he's just awful to her, and she wants to be like the best. She wants to prove herself in the land of fairy and to show like, hey, I can be just as good as you even though I'm only human. And there's like political stuff that happens, and I did like that part. I did like the ending with the political things, but it felt a little flat to me. A little bit of this book was, I don't know, it just wasn't really my thing. It wasn't really my favorite. I didn't really have an issue with the writing style. I guess I just didn't really connect with the characters like maybe like I think I would have liked to. And again, the enemies to lovers, it wasn't like necessarily enemies to lovers, but more like enemies to like kind of lovers. I don't know. Weird. If you read the book, you kind of understand what I'm saying. I wasn't a fan. I just thought it happened way too quickly. There was like no anything to like bring into pound. It was just like, oh, all of a sudden like we're okay now, and I was like, what? It just, to me, I just felt like it was too rushed, I guess. So I gave this book a 3-star, though I will continue on with the series and I am excited to see where it goes. And I've heard the 3rd book is horrible but the 2nd book is good, so we'll see. After that, I have my next 5-star read of the month, and that is The Dead House by Dawn something. This book, though I do highly recommend listening to this book on audiobook, the audiobook was amazing. I do think that this may not have been a 5-star if it wasn't for the audiobook, because the audiobook brought this book to life. It was, I don't know, yeah, full cast, I guess, audiobook, but basically this is kind of like a mixed media type of story, and it's about these girls who are basically 2 souls in one body. So the psychiatrist says that they have DID, or dissociative identity disorder, but they claim, no, we've always been this way, we were born this way, we're just 2 people in the same body. And one of the girls has the day side and one has the night side. And so it's Carly and Kylie, I think. So the Kylie, the night side of the personality, or girl, she considered, you know, they both believe that they are fully themselves. It's basically, this is her story, and it's like, it's told in diary entries, it's told in police reports, it's told in patient, what is the word I'm looking for? Psychiatric, like, interviews, like, counseling sessions, and, like, notes and stuff. So it definitely in newspaper clippings, and so it's told in these different ways, and it's about this, basically this fire happened and burned down this school and a couple people died and the girl disappeared. And so they're trying to figure out, like, this is years later and this person's doing like an investigation, and they have all these, found this old journal that was written by Kylie, the night person, and it's basically her telling her story of everything that had happened and dealing, and then you kind of go back and forth and talking to the psychiatrist and talking with the police and like other characters. It was so good. It was so well executed. The music, the ambiance of this book was amazing. There's kind of a part in this book where you feel like this character is kind of spiraling into madness, and you really get that with the audiobook because of the sound effects and kind of the way that they say certain words. You're just like, oh my gosh, it was so, so good. So if you're gonna read this book, I definitely recommend reading it on audiobook. I think the experience is just so much more when you read it that way versus reading it just physically. Yeah, this was a 5-star for me. I truly enjoyed this. I will say though that it may be triggering for people with DID, though the author herself has a family member who has DID, so she is familiar with it. I just think that like once like the book goes on, it makes it better, but in the beginning it could be a bit jarring and a bit damaging for someone who has that. So just know that if you suffer from it, or have that condition, be aware that this book might be triggering. It is very jarring the way it's written, because it's not like a cohesive timeline. You kind of bounce back and forth between timelines, and you get like journal entries, but they didn't find like all the journal entries because some of them were like ripped out or the pages were burned. Or there's like video diaries, and like you don't find all the archives of the videos. So it does take a little bit to get used to kind of the story as it's going, because you're talking about, you know, the story, but you're not hearing everything from A to B. You're kind of like here to here, then over here, and then up here and down here, and you know, it's very all over the place, but it does come together very nicely in the end to make a very cohesive story at the very end of the book. Yeah, I recommend it, highly recommend it. I think this would be a great read for like Halloween. It would be a great read for that time of year. I gotta say, I'm super excited to read her other works because this was just such a unique, interesting book that I've never read anything quite like this before. And yeah, recommend, recommend, recommend. And the very last book that I read in the month of January is The Diabolic by S.J. Kincaid. This book I rated 4 stars. So basically what this book is about a futuristic world where it's kind of like space travel. Everyone lives, well, not everyone, but like it lives on different planets and in space. So it's kind of like futuristic in that sense, sci-fi in that sense. And there are these AIs called Diabolic. And the whole purpose of the Diabolic is to protect a person. So this young girl gets a Diabolic, and she is like the daughter of like a congressman or like someone like in the government. And so her parents give her this Diabolic to protect her, and basically the Diabolic looks human-ish for the most part, but is like super strong, super smart, like only cares about protecting this one person and will like kill anybody that gets in their way that tries to harm this person. Well, something happens, and to be able to protect her, they need her to go to basically be sent to the king's court, and so they need the Diabolic to take her place and pretend to be her. So it's really interesting because the Diabolic doesn't feel like she is a real human, and she doesn't have, like, she's struggling with the fact that like she's not supposed to have emotions and she's not supposed to have feelings, but she does. And it's her story of trying to navigate this and trying to pretend to be this girl and act like she acts and talk like she talks and all this stuff. And it's a very, very interesting book. This was another book I really felt dealt with like inner beauty and inner because this is another book too that kind of, you can change your appearance, and so I really felt like this book was very much so talking about the idea of like, what is human, like what is it to be human. And you know, you can be beautiful on the outside but ugly on the inside. And it's basically her, the Diabolic, Nemesis is her name, and she's trying to basically, you know, navigate court life and still pretend to be this girl, while at the same time figuring out like, is she falling in love? But then like Diabolics aren't supposed to have feelings like that. And it's really, really interesting. I really enjoyed it. I will say there is a trigger warning for pet death in this book. It didn't really play a big role in the storyline, but as someone who like just lost their baby, my dog passed away a few months ago, it was really hard for me to read that. It really is like a tiny section, and it's just talked about for a little bit and then kind of like forgot about. But just know that it's in there. It doesn't take again, like it's not a huge part of the story, but it was enough still that it really was like jarring to me, brought, you know, triggering, I guess, to me. So just know that's there, just in case you know, are dealing with that kind of thing. But other than that, I recommend it. It was really good. Again, I listened to the audiobook of all these books. For the most part, they were all really wonderful, and I will be continuing the series pretty soon. So yes, that's it. I am done with my January wrap-up. Thank you if you stuck with me to this video. I hope that I was able to better explain books than I have been in the past. I know I'm working on it. I'm getting there. I just gotta keep my thoughts all together. It's still difficult because I don't script these videos, so trying to get my thoughts together is hard because there's just a big old mess in there. So if you like this video, do please give it a thumbs up. That would really help me out. You can find me on social media. I am sweet.t.reads on Twitter and Instagram. I believe they're the same, unless one, I don't know, but they're linked down below. You can find all my information about everything, book information, all that stuff linked down below, so make sure to check out the description box, give it a thumbs up, and subscribe if you haven't already, and I will hopefully see you in the next video. Bye.